Hi everyone, welcome to another new video on Design and Code Lab. So today we are not going to discuss about a new topic in HLD, rather we would discuss about the frameworks which we can use to solve most of the problems in HLD. So without wasting any time, let's dive deep into discussions of the frameworks which we can use. So in this video, we are going to discuss about the frameworks which we can use to solve most of the high-level design problems in interview. So one rule of thumb in every HLD problems, if you have gone through my previous videos, what we were actually following the steps was like there was a user who makes an API request to the server computes something, upon computation it stores something in the database or retrieves from the database, compute in itself and return the result to the user. In the database, data is stored. Some of the hot data which we want to query more frequently are stored in the cache. Now with more number of users incoming, we need to scale our system, so we have the scaling, and then some additional features like monitoring to get the logs if there is an error, to check the working of the entire system and all. So this is monitoring. So this is the overall path which we follow. So there's an user, there's an API, there's a compute, storage, cache, scaling and monitoring. I'll discuss with you today some 5 steps which if you keep in mind and if you follow them step by step, you can solve most of the HLD problems in an interview round. So the first step which I am going to discuss, and if you have followed my previous videos, you would know how I was teaching you or how I was solving the problems or approaching the problem. So first is we have scope design or design of scope. So in this step what we do is we clarify the statement. So problem statement, like suppose we have been provided with a problem by the interviewer is like design a URL shortener. So for that what we do is, what is URL shortener? So URL shortener is expected to shorten a long URL, redirect, handle, scale, etc. So this is the HLD topic which we will be looking into in the interview round. So in this step we will just clarify the problem statement. So what is URL shortener? By URL shortener, what are the expectations of the interviewer to solve in this design round? So after that, so here in this we have problem statement. Then we note down the functional requirements, that is the most important requirements which we should be covering in the interview round or while designing the component or the system. So we have the functional requirements, like what the system must do. So like in URL shortener, it must shorten the URL and redirect. Whenever this shorten URL is being clicked, it would redirect to the long URL or the original website. Similarly, we have an on functional requirement. So like what this discusses about the scalability, like the latency, how will you reduce the speed of fetching the long URLs from a short URL, and all. Availability, what if the short URL has expired and how will you retry it, or how will you get the long URL from a new shortened URL, and all those things. So we have this problem statement, we have the functional requirements, and we have the non-functional requirements. So this is step 1. Next step, once we are clarified and once we have discussed about all these features which we will be covering in the next 30 to 45 minutes of the interview round, we will now dive a level deeper into discussing of those components. So the second step would be break down the system. So if you remember these steps, if you remember the words, this is very easy to remember and very much easy to explain, right? Like break down the system, like break down each individual components of your system design, which you have discussed just in the previous step, right, with the interviewer. So here we will be looking into like what are the core components which we have or which we require while designing our system, like the API gateway, what should be the database, what should be the caching, if any message queue is required, what kind of web servers will be needing, like stateful or stateless, etc. And to explain it more easily, to the interviewer, so that the interviewer can also visualize what you are thinking or what you are trying to explain, we can draw a block diagram, simple block diagram on a high level basis. So like the request goes to the web server in turn computes. If it wants to fetch some data from the database, first look into the cache, then the database, and it is retrieved from the database, compute and return the result to the user. And if any other things are also required, additional things are required in your system, you can discuss in a high level, and also understand the data flow, like how is data moving in your system. Okay, so now once we break down the system, once we have discussed all the above steps, the third step which comes is discuss with the interviewer, like what kind of components does he want you to dive deep into. If he wants to dive deep into the database part, or whether he wants to dive deep into the caching strategy, what caching strategy, or what is the API gateway, or how you are distributing your data across all the nodes and all. So just discuss with the interviewer what he is most interested to listen in this interview round. So but since we are discussing in a generic perspective, so we will be looking into all the components. So now we dive deep into the components. So what we explain, or what are we expecting from this step is, like, first we will be discussing like what is the need of each of the component, need or purpose. Why, like, you are using this web server, why not stateless, why not stateful, why are you using load balancer, why are you using a relational database or a non-relational database. So all these things, depending on the interviewer's perspective, we will be discussing in each of the steps. So this is the need or purpose of individual components which we will be using in the designing of our system. So just I gave you an example, like SQL versus NoSQL. What is your choice and why are you using it? In mem cache or distributed cache, which one would you prefer and why, and all those things. Also you can discuss the trade-offs, like one of the trade-off which we discuss is the cap theorem, consistency, availability, partition problem theorem. We have the performance versus cost. Then we have the simplicity, the scalability, and all those things. Scalability, the sharding, partitioning of databases and all. So how will you be getting those, how will you partition, what will be your key, and all those things you can discuss in this step. So just a quick recap, what we discussed till now is, like, we first discussed the scope, what is the problem statement, which is just to clarify with the interviewer that you both are on the same page. Then discuss with the functional and the non-functional requirements, like what do you want the core design of your system, what is the core components which you require in your system, and the non-functional is like the availability, scalability, etc. Then we break down the system, we look into individual components, what are the core components on a high level, like where will you place those things in your design, how the data will flow and all, and just draw a high level block diagram so that you both are on the same page and the interviewer can also visualize what you are thinking. Now once both of this done, we now dive deep into the components, like each of the individual components, like the web servers or the database, depending on the interviewer what he wants to discuss in more details. So like what is the purpose of your choice of the database, like whether you are using SQL or NoSQL, kind of cache which you are using, what is the caching strategy which you are using. So all those things you can discuss with the interviewer, and also discuss the trade-offs in your design, what is the trade-off, what is the performance, what is your cost, and all those things, how you are maintaining consistency, if it is a strong consistent system, or rather availability, which one you are preferring and why, and all those things you can discuss in this step. And now once all these things are done, you have mostly covered most of the things in your component. If the interviewer wants to dive deep into a single component, like he wants to dive deep into the details of a cache, what is a cache, where will you place the cache, what kind of caching strategy, what are the different types of caching strategy are there, write through, read through, etc., and how will you maintain the strong consistency in the cache, how will you maintain data consistency in the cache. Like this is, I'm just talking about an example of cache. He can discuss in details about any of the topics which he likes. So mostly we must be prepared in most of the things and be able to answer whatever the interviewer is expecting from us. So this is a optional step which you can go through if you are interested in any of the component, that is the covering of HLD dimensions. So what is meant by this step is like we discuss about like the API design. So like what is the endpoint, what is the API call will you send, what are the data parameters, what is the headers, etc., and what kind of request response you are expecting. Is it a 200 OK response or something 501 or 301 302 for the URL shortener? So all those things you can discuss with the interviewer. Then you have the storage design. If the interviewer is interested in discussing about the data, which what kind of data will you store in the database, like the schema, what is your what key will you be indexing your database, what is partitioning, what is the key which you use for partitioning and replication, all those things here it can be discussed in details. So this is the schema, indexing, partitioning, replication, all those things can be here. It is the endpoints. I'll just write so that you guys can recall endpoints and the response. Then we have like caching strategy, which I just discussed now. What kind of caching, where will you place the cache, like is it a client side, is it a server side, or in the, what CDN you are using, and what kind of cache, what is the cache which you can use, like Redis is used most frequently, so you can read about it and also discuss it about it. So like client side or CDNs or Redis, that is the in-mem cache. Then about the consistency, like is your system strong consistent, or is your eventual consistency, like depending on the requirement of the system which you are designing, you can answer it. So like strong versus eventual. Then about the availability, you can discuss about availability, like how will you maintain the availability of your system in case of server is down, and on all those things. So which I have discussed in my previous HLD topics, so you can go through them and you will get a very good understanding of how these things fit into each of the individual components which we design. Then we discuss about the scalability, and then comes security if required, if the interviewer is interested in to know, like the auth, JWT, rate limiting, like if numerous requests comes, a burst of requests comes in a short span of time, how will you handle them. And then we have the observability or the monitoring. So if you remember, we discussed in that the first, so this is the flow which we are following actually. This is the users, then we have the API design, then we compute, and then we have the storage. Then we discussed about the caching strategy, then we discussed about scaling, consistency, availability, and then finally monitoring. So this is the overall flow which we follow, and in each of the flow we branch out into the details depending on how the interview goes, or what is the interviewer expecting. So these are mostly the 4 steps which we can keep in mind, or to design, or these are the frameworks which I would say if you keep these 4 steps in mind, then it would be very easy for you to approach any kind of HLD problem. Since if you see the pattern of any HLD problem, like it's like blocks are present which are scattered here and there, and you have to just plug it into right places for your system to work properly. So if you follow this flow, and if you know about some of the mostly used components like what cache, the Redis, the database, SQL, NoSQL, etc., I think you can approach most of the problems in HLD. So this is the overall framework which I have to discuss today in this video. And one thing I would also provide you is a kind of a table which you can maintain with every kind of so this is kind of which I am now telling you is like kind of something you want to follow if you want to memorize things, but I would not suggest to do this. But if you want to, in case if you want to, and if it's benefiting you, then I would like to share with you this part also. So just maintain for any, so I'll just share with you a general table. So here table would be like what are the columns. So these are the components. One will be the components, and the other would be used or not. So for suppose any HLD topic which you are studying, you can put like load balancers, whether they are used or not, why they are used. You can just maintain why they are used and where they are placed. So then we have the caching layers. So just whatever I discussed in the earlier part, so that is just formulated into a table. Then we have the message queues, then we have the CDNs, then the API gateways, and finally the observability, that is the monitoring and logging. So you can follow this kind of table in every problem. Most of the HLD problems, they mostly use these components only. So if you follow this table and just fill up this table and keep it as a handy note in order to revise, I think it would be benefiting for you. So I hope you got an idea of how to approach any kind of HLD problem using these 4 steps and this table, which I think would be helpful for you. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Using these frameworks, we will be discussing more HLD interesting problems. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video.